142. And you might have noticed that this finishes up the chapter, so make sure that you're studying, a little bit every single night, so that way you're ready for any quizzes that are coming up the next couple of days, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday. So make sure that you're studied and that you're prepared for it. So make sure you're keeping up with everything. Alright, so page 142, 1 through 4. What issue created the greatest sectional conflict? Hopefully you wrote slavery. There is a bunch of them, but slavery is the main one. Number 2, what was the Missouri Compromise? This brought Maine into the Union as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. So as you can tell, we're gearing up towards the Civil War. Not quite there yet, but we're getting close. Number 3, who were the favorite sons in the election of 1824? That was John Quincy Adams, William H. Crawford, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson. So those are the 4 favorite sons. Number 4, what led to the tariff controversy during the 1820s? Congress adopted a higher tariff to protect the northeastern manufacturers at the expense of the southern economy. Alright, you can go ahead and put that away. For your classwork, I'm going to have you write the bold terms and definitions from the start of the chapter, which I know you did some of these yesterday, but you need to be reviewing a little bit every single night. So page 133 up to page 139, that's about as far as we got, because we got barely to page 138, but do over to page 139. So 133 through 139, bold terms, so the bold terms and their definitions, or what was important about them. So just the bold terms and their definitions. I'll say because some of these you did already yesterday, I'm just going to say twice. But if you remember yesterday what you wrote down and what I verbally corrected on with the classwork afterwards, write down what I said, because I'm going through what's the important things to know about them, maybe not the first sentence directly after the term. So just be sure that you're going through and you're studying what are the important things that you need to study, what are the important things that you need to know, not just what's the next sentence right after it. So make sure you're studying. Also, as a side note, if you finish this really quick, because remember your classwork will take you about 5 to 10 minutes, be reviewing your presidents as well. Hopefully you found a YouTube video or something that has a song for you to help you to memorize them. So if you finish early in 5 to 10 minutes, go back and work on your presidents and start working on them. You're going to take the quiz over the first 25, probably next Wednesday. So don't think, oh, we're going to come back and spend a lot of time getting ready for it. You're going to have about a week from today. So make sure that you're going through them, that you're learning just the first 25. Some of them you already know. So just make sure that you're learning them in the proper order of last names, unless there's duplicates like Adams. You need to know the first and last name for both Adams. Alright, so go ahead and pause the video and work on your classwork. Alright, assuming that you've unpaused the video now, let's go ahead and let's go over this. So hopefully between yesterday and today, you have a good idea over what you should know about some of these important facts. Alright, so what is the date for the Nationalist era? 1814 to 1828. Do note that, make a note for it. Why was it called the Nationalist era? Because overall there was a spirit of nationalism for the country. Now you did have different regions like north versus south versus west. I'm pointing to it for your west as a side note. I know this is my east side, but I know that whenever you're looking at it, it'll be north, south, and west. So that's what I'm pointing at. So it's the idea of the north, south, and then west of the country. But overall, people said we're going to do it for the good of the nation. That's why it's the Nationalist era. Alright, what is the year for the Second Bank of the United States starting? What's the year for that? 1816. Just make a note for that one as well. Alright, let's see, what was the reason that the Republicans said, okay, traditionally, we don't like the National Bank, but we understand, we're gonna go ahead and approve it or vote for it. Why? Because again, the Republicans said, okay, out of the good of the nation of the whole, we will go ahead and give our consent, even though we don't really like the National Bank. We will go ahead and give our consent for it. Even though we personally don't really like it, we understand for the best of the nation, it's a good thing. Alright, what is the title for the first protective tariff? It's the tariff of what? 1816, so it's the same date as the charter for the Second Bank of the United States. Just make a note, 1816. Alright, who is the person that ends up approving this tariff, but he doesn't like tariffs traditionally? You're going to see him a lot. John C. Calhoun, good job. Alright, who won the election of 1816 and then again in 1820? James Monroe, perfect. What do we call his whole administration? Just because overall people got along. The air of good feelings. Good job. So air of good feelings. Again, it's not perfect, but it's pointing out that overall, people generally, at least politically, got along. Alright, what was the panic, this first economic depression, caused partly by speculation? 1819, so it's the depression of 1819, so make a note for that one. What is speculation? That's whenever you buy land with the intent of selling it later on at a profit, which in and of itself is okay, but since they were borrowing money from the bank, so it's not theirs, and then they're using it for speculation, now you're doing two risky acts. Whenever you have too many people doing that, it's unwise, and it causes a lot of financial trouble. Alright, so we talked about the Supreme Court. Who was the Supreme Court Justice during this time period? John Marshall. Remember, there were 3 court cases your book talks about in this section with important decisions that he did. What was important about McCulloch versus Maryland? He upheld the doctrine of implied power, saying that, okay, even though it doesn't specifically say it in the Constitution, it's implied, it's necessary and proper to have a national bank. And then also, a state cannot tax a portion of the federal government. So, McCulloch versus Maryland, that is the doctrine of implied powers. What was important about Dartmouth College versus Woodward? What was important about that court case? It was the idea of a state can't come over into a private institution and change it into a public institution. So once you start private, you can stay private if you want to. Alright, and what's special about Gibbons versus Ogden? The Supreme Court ruled what interstate commerce was. Alright, so going over into yesterday's material, alright, there were 4 states that were added during this time period after the Treaty of Ghent. What were they? Make sure I covered all the bold terms. Yeah, I did. Alright, so Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, and Alabama. Just make a note for those 4. What was the name for the road that connected Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia? There's 2 names for it, technically. Cumberland Road or the National Roads. Make a note for this is the time where the federal government builds the roads. Typically today, it's because of more of a state thing. So just make a note of this is whenever the federal government constructed the Cumberland Road. Alright, who came up with the bonus bill? We'll put it this way. Who came up with the bonus bill saying, we're going to take the bonus from the National Bank, and we're going to use it for, I drew a blank on the term. Internal improvements. That's the term I was looking for. So, building roads. So that was John C. Calhoun. So make a note that the bill, it was supposed to help out with internal improvements or internal development, so building roads, but now, did it pass Congress? Put it this way. Yes. Did the president sign it into a law? No, President Madison vetoed it because he said, okay, I understand it's a good idea, but it's not really part of the federal government's power or job, and so that's why I'm vetoing it. So it's a good idea, just it's not really, he was saying, I don't think it should be part of the federal government's job. I think it should be more of a state-by-state thing. Alright, who proposed the American system? Henry Clay. Now, what was the American system? The American system partly used the bonus from the National Bank, but they also said that, hey, we're going to put a high protective tariff on manufactured goods in the East to protect the Eastern manufacturers, and we're going to use that money for internal improvements out West. So, it's going to the idea of combine or link the country together. So he was hoping it would link the United States as an economic unit with protecting Eastern manufacturing and then using the money to help out with Western land improvements. So, just make note of that, the American system. Alright, who was Monroe's Secretary of State? John Quincy Adams, good job. What was the greatest progress in improving foreign relationships between us and Great Britain? That's the Rush-Bagot Agreement. Good job. Alright, who crossed into Spanish territory of Florida and to capture the smugglers and the pirates and the raiders? He ended up hanging 2 Indian chiefs and then executed 2 British subjects. So he did what he was supposed to, but he wasn't really supposed to do it in Spanish territory. Andrew Jackson, good job. Alright, so the British foreign minister didn't really say anything about it because he understood that the British shouldn't have been over there, the British subjects shouldn't have been down there stirring up trouble. But what did we tell the Spanish to do about their Florida territory? They had 2 options. Either send military force to go control it or sell it to us. So, what was the year whenever Florida ceded or gave Florida to us? Now, technically we did pay them for it, but what is the year that they ceded it to us? 1819 again. So remember, there are 2 things things that happened in 1816, two things that happened in 1819, so make sure that you know both of them. So this is whenever Spain and the United States, they agreed to the Adams-Onis Treaty, where Spain ceded or gave Florida to us, but we also paid off $5 million worth of American claims of debt, of saying that the Spanish owed debts to the American citizens. The federal government said, we will pay these off for you. So basically we gave Spain $5 million for it. So they also agreed, though, that they would give up claim to the Oregon Territory. We did lose Texas in this agreement, but at least we had a definite border. What was important about the Rush-Bagot Agreement between us and Great Britain? Remember, we would demilitarize the zones up by the Great Lakes region, and then later on, we had a treaty with the 49th parallel, establishing it as the border up there. Alright, that's as far as we got on page 138. You're going to have a little bit more classwork defining what Creoles were, the three major leaders for Latin America, so Simon Bolivar, Miguel Hidalgo, José de San Martín, and then with the Monroe Doctrine and the date. So we'll go over these more as we talk about them. So you can go ahead and take out your textbook if you don't have so already. Turn over to page 138, because that's where we left off. Alright, so the Monroe Doctrine. So what was happening down here? Now this is more of focusing on the United States in 1819. So we were having Latin American countries or Central American countries. They were rising up against Spain. This is the Spanish territory down here for it. So you were having the Creoles. Now sometimes people, whenever they say Creole, they think it's a slur or a slang word. Typically, how your book uses it and how most people use it, you're just referring to a particular ethnicity group, so it's not being used as like a slang or as like a bad slur for someone. A Creole is just a people of Spanish, Portuguese, or French descent, to where their parents came over to the New World, and then they took spouses, typically wives, because it was mostly gentlemen that came over, but they were taking Native American wives, and so because of these kids were of mixed blood. So that's where this idea comes from. So a Creole, they were mixed blood of Native Americans and then Europeans that came over. So that's how come it's Spanish, Portuguese, or French. Since you're having a lot of those explorers in particular in the Latin American or South American, Central American countries. So that's what I thought, so speaking of that, and that is a Creole, is the people of Spanish, Portuguese, or French descent born in the New World. So these are of mixed heritage. So the Native Americans and the Creoles, the descendants, they did not like the Spanish rule. The Spanish had a very undemocratic view because it was still the Spanish monarchy. And so because of that, the people living over here in the New World said, we don't like what the Spanish are doing. The American colonists, they fought for their independence. We want to be independents too as well. So beginning in 1810, one Spanish colony after another began to fight and win their independence. Europe talks about three major figures for them. Now, these are not associated with our country's history, but since Latin America is so close and is a neighbor to us, that's why your book talks about them super quick. So you probably remember learning more about them last year in world history. That's the reason why your book talks about them, because Mexico and the Latin American countries are our neighbors, and that's the reason why the book talks about them kind of quick. Just make a note though of these three leaders for it. So Simon Bolivar, Miguel Hidalgo, and José de San Martín. It's been a while since I've taken Spanish, but I believe that's how you pronounce them correctly. Just make a note though of those three people, how these are heroic figures in Latin America. So just make a note that those are their three major leaders for Latin America, but just make a note for them. Alright, so by 1820, practically all of Latin America had won their independence. Now, the United States did not mind that for it. We didn't mind, okay, if they want to be independent of Spanish rule, that's fine, that's okay. Because remember, Spain was having a hard time enforcing their rules over here anyway. So we were more okay with these colonies becoming independent of Spanish rule. In the same year, though, Europe threatens to reconquer to the Spanish Empire. With the French Revolution, a lot of the European monarchies and a lot of the European countries didn't like democracy anymore. They understood that, okay, the American colonies handled it well, but the French Revolution was terrifying, and the Napoleonic Wars were horrifying. So they did not like the democratic spirit of having revolution. So once Spain was having trouble with her colonies in the New World, a lot of the European nations said, no, we don't like democracies, we're tired of this rebellion, we're getting rid of all of it, we don't like this. And so they said that they wanted to go help out Spain reconquer her territories. So in 1822, at the Congress of Verona, the nations of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and France vowed put down a revolutionary uprising in Spain and threatened to help Spain reconquer her new world colonies. So it's kind of weird thinking about, oh, these other nations are helping Spain. Yes, but it's because they were worried about these revolutionary ideas spreading into their own countries. Remember, that's one of the reasons why whenever the United States broke off ties with Britain officially, that's one of the reasons why we wrote the Declaration of Independence saying, here's the reasons why we're breaking off ties and we're declaring ourselves to be independent. We're not just becoming independent just because. We have reasons. We have a list of grievances against the king. The king is trying to force parliament on us. The king has no authority to do this to us. We've never been part of parliament. And that's part of the reasons why France helped us out originally, because France knew, they have kind of a just cause, and France didn't like Great Britain. Now you have France siding with Spain saying, hey, I'm going to help you take over your colonies again. Because France doesn't like the revolutions or the revolutionary ideas. But they understood that America's beginnings were different than what happened with the French and with their revolutions. That's part of the reason why France is helping out Spain now. Great Britain was one of the European colonies that didn't want to help Spain. Your book points out there are two major reasons for it. That Britain had built up a profitable trade with the new nations of Latin America. Because remember, Great Britain was big on trading and with share and with trade and imports. So by this time period, Great Britain was already trading with the Latin American countries and was already making money. So Great Britain understood, if they go back under Spanish rule, we're going to lose that source of income. Second reason was European diplomats talked of sending a large French army to help Spain reconquer her former colonies, and many of the British were suspicious that the Frenchmen, as they come over to help Spain, they will also conquer territory for themselves as well. So Britain was very suspicious of France and of her motives. They felt like, okay, France is coming over to help, but how much help are they going to be really? Or are they just using it as an excuse to come conquer territory too? So that was the reasons why Great Britain didn't like the idea of France coming over and helping out Spain, or the other European nations coming over and helping the Latin American countries come back under Spanish rule. So the British Foreign Secretary suggested to the Americans that, hey, maybe we should join up together to have the United British and American will ally up together. Now, we're not uniting ourselves, but it was the idea of, hey, let's work together to try to keep France in particular, but Spain and the other European countries from coming back over and conquering sections of the continent. Now, Russia also comes in at this point. Russia, you'll make a note of, we haven't talked about Russia a whole lot, but Russia issued a decree saying that the Oregon Territory is part of Alaska. Now, you might wonder, okay, why does Russia care? You probably don't have a globe at your house, so you probably can't see this super well. But keep in mind that Russia is over here in Asia, and so you have the Bering Strait and there's Alaska. So they were claiming Alaska as part of their territory, but they're also saying that Alaska goes all the way down into the Oregon Territory, which the United States felt like, it's never been part of Alaska before. Why isn't something part of Alaska now? So we were trying to figure out how are we going to handle that with Russia as well. So we had 4 countries claiming the Oregon Territory. If you remember, we claimed it, the British claimed it, the Spanish originally claimed it. They said that their territory went all the way up here, and now you have Russia trying to go down and claim it as well. So we realized, okay, not only do we have to deal with Latin America and their colonies, are they independent or not, we have to deal with Russia and Alaska and Oregon and all that section as well. So, even though Candy's proposal for a joint Anglo-American declaration was promising, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams said, this isn't a good idea, and we shouldn't do this. So, he advised President Monroe, here's a couple reasons why to not do this. He believed that Spain would not actually invade Latin America. He said it's too much work for Spain to send over ships to go conquer Latin America. Spain is having trouble keeping Florida originally. Because remember, Florida was just succeeded to us in 1819. This is around the year 1822. So he said that's too much work. If they can't control Florida, they're not going to send over ships to go conquer Latin America. That's too much work and too much effort. They're not going to do it. Second thing was the United Kingdom or Great Britain expected the United States to pledge to never take any Spanish American territory for herself. Britain said, hey, if we join up, we don't want you to take over any of the Latin American territory. And we understood, No, we might want some of that land. We might want to purchase it later on, and we don't want to have an entangling alliance at a treaty with you saying we promise not to take any more land. No, we kind of want a lot of the Spanish land. So we want to make sure that we're not going to make any promises now that we might end up breaking later on. So because of that, we would prevent America from taking over Cuba or any other Latin America territory. We do have the option later on in history. We talk about purchasing Cuba. So that's probably the reason why your book specifically mentions Cuba in this section. Third, Adams pointed out that it might be necessary for the United States to take independent action against Russia's design for the Oregon Territory. Remember, originally we were supposed to rule the British rule and the United States were both supposed to take over Oregon, and they said with Russia's decree of this is all Alaska's territory, we might have to fight independent of Great Britain in order to push it back, and we don't want this entangling alliance to mess this up. And then finally, he said, it just looks better for America, for the United States, if we come in independently. A lot of the nations respect Great Britain because it's Great Britain, and Great Britain has been a superpower for so long. We're still coming out as a new nation. Now, the other nations respect us, but it'll look better for us if we stay independent of Great Britain. If we ally ourselves with Great Britain, it makes us look weak. So he's saying, no, we need to stay independent of each other. Look at your book with the quote at top of page 139. It would be more candid as well as dignified for the United States to act independently rather than to come in as a cockboat. That's the type of boat it's referring to. So a small boat in the wake of the British man of war. He's saying that Great Britain is understood as being the superpower, as being this large and powerful nation, like the British man of war. He was saying it makes us look like a small boat if we come in and just ally ourselves next to Great Britain. He's saying, no, we need to make sure we're independent. We want to be on equal footing. So that way, we both want the same thing, but we're going to do it independently of each other. So because of this, President Monroe decided, okay, I'm going to follow my secretary's advice. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams has given me some very excellent advice. This sounds like a good idea, so I'm going to follow it. So he issued the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. Make a note of this date. I'm going to write it over here because I'm running out of room over there. So, 1823, the Monroe Doctrine. Make a note for that one. So, there are two parts to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, he didn't want to offend a European power, so he just made it, he just made it a statement of American foreign policy, and he was just saying it in his annual messages to Congress. But since that information is recorded, the other European nations heard about it, but he wasn't saying it specifically to any European nation. So, there's two parts to it. First part, the Monroe Doctrine pledged the United States would not interfere in European affairs that did not concern her. Whatever happens in Europe, like with the Napoleonic Wars, that's your issue, you deal with it. But the second part was Monroe warned that the American continents were not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. And then part two on it, we should consider any attempt on their European parts to extend their system to any portion of its hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. Basically, that second part is saying, okay, there's no more land available for colonization. Don't come over here and try to colonize. We are here, and we view it as a threat to our safety if you're coming over to try to colonize or dib land over here now. So, he's saying that basically all the land in North and South America is now dibbed. It is all claimed. Everybody has claimed it at this point. If any land opens up, we want first dibs on it, or they're free and independent. He's saying, nope, there is no more coming over and establishing colonies over here. It's a threat to our safety if you keep doing that. So make a note of those two parts for it. So with the Monroe Doctrine. Now that first part sounds a little harsh, how we don't want to interfere with European affairs. But he was saying, look, it's your problems. If you have wars, y'all deal with it. You figure it out and you deal with it. Now we were still a young nation and we did not want to get involved in conflict. And he's basically saying to the European nations, you stay over in your section of the world and mind your business and stay over there. We will mind our business, you mind your own business. Stay out of our section of the world. And that was the basic idea of the Monroe Doctrine. Now, at this time period, most European nations heard it and they realized, yeah, America, you can say that, but we don't really care what you say. America was still a young nation. Now, out of respect for Great Britain, they did not contest what President Monroe said. So most European leaders realized the United States did not really have the power to back up what President Monroe said, but out of respect for Great Britain, and since Great Britain was saying stay out of Latin America, they realized, okay, we'll let this go. You can say whatever you want. Now later on, as America starts to rise in power, this Monroe Doctrine comes back up whenever future presidents say, remember, Monroe Doctrine, any land that becomes available we have first dibs on. You stay out of our territory and we'll stay out of yours. This doctrine or this idea becomes much more prominent, and whenever America has the power to enforce it later on, we do enforce the Monroe Doctrine. So this becomes much more important later on in history. Just make a note though, 1823 is the date for it and the two parts. Alright, next page. Sectional differences. So this section, there is a lot of conflict between North and South and West in this section. So this picture isn't quite exactly perfect as to how the country is set up at this time period, but it's a good idea to see North versus South versus West for this particular section flip. So there were 4 major issues that you had the North versus the South versus the West on. So what you probably want to do is mark them as I go through them. So your book puts them to you in words. So if you want to mark them in words as we go through them, that would be a good way to do it. So what happens is that you have that first major kind of controversy has to do with the idea of westward expansion, internal improvements, and easy land policies. Those kind of ideas are all kind of lumped together into one section. I'm going to slide the camera over to make sure you can see it. So it's the good, I'm not right where the bar was this time. So it's the idea of westward expansion, internal improvements like building railroads, and then also easy land policies. So that was kind of like the first big idea altogether. Then you had the northern section versus the southern section versus the western section of the country. Alright, so for this first section, the westward expansion, what section do you think obviously favored that? Right, the West. The West was very much for that. The West said, yes, we want westward expansion. We want easy land policy. We want to be able to buy land and keep it. We want it to be very cheap for us. We want internal improvements. Now, railroads aren't really a thing yet. Your book referenced them a little bit early on. Technically, railroads don't really come to America until the 1830s. But it's the idea of we want at least better roads. We want internal improvements so that way we can ship our goods back and forth easier. We want to have easy land policy so that way we can buy land easy. So because of that, the West was very much for it. Make a note of that. So most Westerners promoted easy land policies and internal improvements at the federal expense, hoping to make life in the West somewhat easier. The Southerners, now as they moved west, some of them were for it, some of them were against it, so they were kind of mixed on it. So because of that, they had kind of a mixed policy. Now some of them in the South, as they moved farther west, they were obviously for it. But some of the Southerners that stayed behind, because plantations and cotton were becoming a major source of income for the South, they were starting to favor, no, we don't like the idea of competition moving west. We like how it is right now. So the South was pretty much split on the idea of westward expansion, internal improvements, and land policy. They had a mixed view on it. While the North, they did not like it at all. So they were against it. Now, your book gives off 2 major reasons for it. So they saw the federal domain in the West as a national asset which should be sold at a profit for the federal government. So they were saying that the extra land should be sold to help the government to make money. They also said that, hey, if we have people moving west, there's less people to work in our industries or our factories. So we don't want people to move west. We want our cheap labor to stay here in the east and to work for us. And so that's part of the reason why the North is against westward expansion. Alright, the second major controversy was with the Bank of the United States. That was the second major controversy. Now the North liked the bank. They supported it. They knew that it helped stabilize the economy. So because of that, the northern industrials, they continued to be the greatest supporter of the bank. It worked for them and they liked it. Now in the West, based on what happened in 1819, do you think that the West liked the bank or disliked the bank? Correct. The West did not like the bank because they blamed it as part of the panic of 1819. Now they were engaged in speculation, but they blamed the bank for it. So they said that they did not like the national bank, and they did not like having the national bank there. So the West, they did not like it. The Southerners, they had a little bit of a mixed view for it. Well, mainly they were were indifferent to it. They didn't really care. But most of the ones that did have an opinion of the bank, I just threw my chalk on the floor by accident. The ones that did have a view of the bank, the ones that cared, they typically supported it. So most of the Southerners, they didn't have an opinion, they didn't care about the bank because again, they were more over in agriculture, but the ones that did care, they typically supported it. So make a note for the bank, the North supported it, the South supported it, the West hard against it, didn't like it. Alright, the tariff issue. Now remember, what are tariffs? Tariffs, remember, are taxes placed on goods and to protect manufacturing. So, do you think that the Northerners liked the tariffs? Yes, they did. So the Northerners, they liked the tariffs. They said, yes, we want to keep protecting our manufacturing and our industry. So yes, we want the tariffs. Now the South, as the South starts switching over in this time period to, unfortunately, plantations and slavery and cotton, they said, no, we don't like tariffs. You're just taxing just to help out the North at our expense. We don't like tariffs anymore. So traditionally, with the tariff of 1816, the protective tariff, the South was okay with it. Now the South is changing their mind and they're deciding, we don't like this anymore. So the South was against tariffs. So make a note for that. Make a note that the South, they did not like these tariffs. So they were almost exclusively trading with cotton by this point. We're going to get close to that. The West, they typically did, it depending on what section of the West you were in. If you were in the northern section of the West, you sided with the North. If you were in the southern section of the West, you sided with the South. So because of that, the West was also split on this. So, just depending on what section of the West unless you lived in. So the West, they tended to divide into the North and South as well, saying, do they want the tariffs or do they not want the tariffs? Alright, the last issue is slavery. Now, we're not quite to the Civil War yet, but these feelings of should slavery be allowed or not be allowed are becoming more and more dominant. So I know you probably heard this for years with the Civil War, but was the North for or against slavery? They were becoming against it. Now that doesn't mean that there weren't any slaves in the northern states. There were some slaves in the northern states. But you're having a growing movement in the North of becoming abolitionists or people that did not like slavery, and they said, we need to get rid of this. We don't like this institution. We don't think it's right, so we need to get rid of it. Alright, so the South, for or against slavery? For, unfortunately. So we're going to talk about this with the Civil War later on, but unfortunately because the South wanted easy labor, and since they were mass producing cotton, which was an easy, fast crop, they needed slaves in order to get all the cotton picked. And so that's part of the reason why the South was for slavery. Again, unfortunately, but that's part of the reason why for it. And then in the West, the Westerners, now since most of these were coming from the South, moving west, dibbing land for cotton, most of the Western states that were coming on were in support of slavery. So just make a note though, a lot of the countries in the West, as they're coming out and as they're forming up, most of the time they're coming from the people in the South. So as they're moving west, they want slavery in their areas for it. Okay, so I have spent a good 5-10 minutes drawing this diagram and drawing this chart. Okay, good, you can see the whole thing. So I would either suggest you pause your video, you copy it down, because I spent a long time and I went through the effort to draw this on the board. So that should tell you that you should know this really, really well. So either pause the video, copy it down, or if you're on your cell phone, maybe take a screenshot. If you know how to do that, that's fine too as well. But make sure you pause the video, copy it down really quick. So I'm telling you right now, if I go through all the effort to draw it on the board and to leave it on the board, and I'm telling you to know it, you need to know it. Alright, so go ahead and do that really quick. So pause your video, either copy it down or help you make a note for it. That's the easiest way to learn this section, is to know your chart, to say, okay, what section of the country voted what, or what section of the country was for on a particular issue. So for example, with westward expansion, internal improvements, and land policies, North was against it, South was mixed, West was for it. For the bank, North was for it, South was for it, West was against it. Tariffs, North was for it, South was against it, West was split on tariffs. Slavery, North was against it, South was for it, West was for it. So make sure that you want to know it in that way as we're going through it. Okay, so continuing on from that. Alright, the Missouri Compromise. Now, your book points out that, points out that we start to have a new state come in with the territory of Missouri coming out. So where's my mouse? There it is. So Missouri coming in as a state. Now, the previous states, whenever they said that they wanted to come into the Union, wasn't a big deal, just let them come in. But now we're having an imbalance of power between the northern states and the southern states. With the idea of the southern states, they wanted slavery to be allowed in the new states. There's enough people up north now that were abolitionists saying that we don't like slavery, we don't think slavery is right. This is the first time we start seeing the major breaks of North versus South over the ideas of slavery. So James Talmadge in New York, he introduced an amendment for the idea with Missouri coming in that the further introduction of slavery or involuntary servitude be prohibited in the state of Missouri, and that all children born within the said state after the admission into the Union shall be free at the age of 25 years. So they're trying to get rid of slavery in the state of Missouri. Now this passed the House of Representatives, but in the Senate it didn't pass. Now thinking it through, how can you have an amendment pass the House of Representatives but not the Senate? Remember, House of Representatives is based on what? State population. Where do more people live at? In the north or in the south? Voting age people or people that are allowed to vote. In the north. Now there's still a lot of slaves in the south, but remember they're not allowed to vote. So between the voting population, there are more people in the northern section. So the House could pass something like this because there's more people living up north and they were voting against slavery. In the Senate, it's based off what? Number of states. So how many senators did each state get? 2. Now at this point in time here, there was an equal number of states for slavery and states against slavery. So in order for it to get passed, in order for it to pass in the Senate, the southern states were saying, no, we are not letting this through. We're going to vote against it. Now it has to pass both houses of Congress for a bill to become a law, for an amendment to become a law. So that's how come this amendment wasn't passed in this time period, was because the number of states is important, because that determines at least in the Senate if the bill gets passed or not. So that's why there's a balancing of power with free states versus slave states. So your book points out that if they let Missouri come in as a free state, it would have upset the balance. There would be a higher number of free states as opposed to slave states. And the slave states were afraid that the northern states would make slavery illegal. And so that's the reason why they were bucking at it and saying, no, we don't want Missouri to come in as a free state. So later on, though, your book points out that Congress took a break, basically, and they reconvened later on for it. Now, whenever they reconvened or came back, Maine was also ready to come in as a state. So you have Maine up here. So they saw this as a compromise. So make a note of this with the Missouri Compromise, that it said, okay, we're going to let Maine come in as a free state. It's so far north, cotton won't grow there. So there's no way you're going to let cotton or slavery up there. But we'll let Missouri be a slave state so that way it balances out the power. Now Missouri and Maine, they just wanted to come in as states. So Missouri was okay with allowing slavery into their section. Maine was okay with saying, okay, we don't have to have slavery in our section because we're so far north, there's no way you're going to go cotton up here. So, take a note, with Missouri Compromise, it brought in Maine and Missouri. Now, it also said, though, that it would not allow slavery above the 3630 line of the line going across the United States. As the northern states are saying, okay, you can't have slavery above a certain point. Now, this is not the 3630 line, I'm just pointing to that, to just a line on the country. But it's just saying, okay, you can't have, the line's technically right here, but it's saying from this point, you can't have slavery above that section. Now, again, these states are already in existence, but it's saying, okay, for future states, that the states, there's going to be no more slavery coming into those sections. The southern congressmen said, okay, yeah, that's fine, because it's so far north, you can't really grow cotton there anyway. So because of that, we don't really mind. That's okay. You can make it illegal because we don't even want to go up there. So that's probably the reason with Missouri Compromise, it brought in Maine and Missouri. So make a note for those two. All right, really quick with the Favorite Sons election. Make a note the Favorite Sons election is with 18 and 24. So make a note for the date for it. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. But there were 4 of them for it. Now remember, there's only 3 sections, so the West had 2 candidates. The North supported John Quincy Adams, the South supported William Crawford, and the West supported Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. Remember, there weren't really a lot of parties in this era. Most of the Federalists had joined into the Democratic Republicans. So there was basically one party at this time period. So because of that, it was more of North versus South versus West. So the North, they voted for John Quincy Adams. The South voted for William Crawford. The students last year memorized it as Crawford sounds like crawfish, and that's what a lot of the deep southern states like to eat. Like, I grew up in Louisiana, so I like crawfish. So that's how they memorize it, as it sounds like crawfish, so William Crawford for the South. That helps you great. And then also the West, Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. So note those four with the favorite sons election, with the idea of favorite people from each section and the year. This is the year you need to know, 1824. Making notes of that. Alright, we will go ahead and we will stop there for the favorite sons election. We'll finish this up tomorrow, just about out of time, so we'll talk about what happened with the favorite sons election as well. Alright, your homework for tonight. Read pages 144 through 146, 144 through 146. Answer on page 146, questions 1 through 6, and then don't forget the presidential quiz will be next Wednesday. So, page 144 through 146. Answer on page 146, questions 1 through 6. Alright, you guys have a great day. Be sure to be studying in case you have something tomorrow